there's a reality TV show in America. It's absolute trash. My mother loves it. It's called Married at First Sight. It's a social experiment in which they get bachelors in like their late 20s, and bachelors and bachelorettes in their late 20s and early 30s, people who've never been married. And they have a psychologist try to professional matchmaker match them up. Except they marry each other before they they get married, but they don't even know the other person's name before they get married.
Yeah.
And then it's a reality show about them trying to.
Right. But that was my question was,
Can I start daydreaming?
Sure, you can pour me a little bit. So I think you guys are all excited, but the class on relationships is tomorrow. And marriage shouldn't be treated like a game show. It's something a lot more serious. Thank you.
But can we assume that at one point there was a practice or people would do that? No, because usually
Oh yeah, sure. Marriages are
somebody did
arranged.
something and then somebody said, "Oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that."
Could be. But marriages at some point were arranged. Anyways, I want to go back to the laws of Kashrut. Talk about the relationships and marriages tomorrow. As a matter of fact, tomorrow we're going to have the opportunity to participate in a wedding. Very special wedding. First wedding that they already have 8 children. So we'll talk about it tomorrow. More than a technicality, it's something real. It's not just a technicality. Marriage is something very real, and it's something that's only a Jewish marriage. It's only for Jews. So once they convert it, and so
do they have to do something to reaffirm their parentage?
I don't think so. Let's go back to the laws of Kashrut. We were started to talk about the how does taste transfer. How does taste transfer in different objects and different foods? We said that if you're cooking something up in a kli rishon al gabei ha'esh, for sure that has the power to transfer taste from one food to another food into the entire soup, etc. And if you're just pouring on the hot water out of the kli rishon, from the spout, from the kettle, for example, it's going to have the ability to affect the transfer of taste from one object to another object, from one food to another food, but only to the outer layer. It's called kedei klifa, the amount that can be peeled off. So if you manage to peel off the outer layer, then the rest of it won't have the taste of the former object. So if you have some fish with some milk on it, and then some raw fish with some milk on it, and you pour hot water on it, you're going to have to skim off the top layer of the fish. The rest of it will be parv. Only the top layer will be considered to be milchik, because it's not in a kli rishon al gabei ha'esh, it's just getting irui, the pouring. What happens after that? After you pour from one vessel, you get a second vessel. Second vessel is called kli sheni. So food's in a second vessel, and it's not on the fire anymore, so it's just going to continually cool off. The halacha says that second vessels and a third vessels don't have the power to cook. It may still be hot, but the walls of the sides of the second vessel, the pot that it's been placed into now, are going to be cooling it down, and there, of course, it may still be boiling hot at the very beginning, and so the common custom is to be machmir, that it has the power to affect the transfer of taste, at least the outer layer, just like we said about the pouring, even though it's one step removed, because now you're not actually pouring the boiling hot water directly onto the foods, but it's been poured into a second vessel, and then you put the foods in them, then that's going to affect, or machmir, that it affects a taste. So if you take, for example, a vegetable, zucchini, and you put it into a chicken soup, it's going to be a fleshik zucchini. If you put it into chicken soup which is in a pot on the fire. But if you have poured your chicken soup out of that pot and you've put it into a tureen, you know what a tureen is? It's a special bowl for serving soup to the table. You don't bring the pot that it was cooked in. You take the tureen and you bring it to the table with a ladle. It's usually very beautiful and fancy, and it's a nice way to serve the soup. But it's a kli sheni. That tureen is a kli sheni. And then you put your vegetable into the kli sheni, according to what I said, what's the halacha? Is that what did I say? Zucchini. You put it into the chicken soup. Does it become fleshik? Does it become meaty?
Yeah.
We said that we're machmir that only the outer layer does. So theoretically, if you want to peel off the outer layer of the zucchini, the rest of it will remain parv, and that taste, fleshik taste that it receives from the chicken soup, will only be affecting the outer layer of the vegetable. That's a good example of what I was describing about shua and then hirsch. Shua.
Theoretically, if you put it then, you took the soup from the pot to the serving pot to a bowl and then put a zucchini in, would even the outer layer?
You're asking about a kli shlishi.
Exactly.
Kli shlishi. Here too, there's a machloket, but the common custom is to say the kli shlishi is not mavashel at all. Kli shlishi doesn't affect the transfer of taste whatsoever. So if you had put your chicken soup from the tureen into a bowl, and then you put in the zucchini would remain parf. It would be like cold. If you put zucchini into a cold chicken soup, no chance. Wash it off, and you can have it with your milky food, no problem. Okay? Kli shlishi is considered to be cold according to most poskim. Yes?
You claim to be machmir, but say that only the top layer needs to be removed. How is that machmir?
We're talking about the specific set.
Because other opinions say it doesn't affect any transfer of taste at all. The zucchini in the second vessel in the tureen will not going to get any taste from that chicken soup, right? Only the kli rishon al gabei ha'esh affects transfer of taste. Now the big,
And
of course, yeah.
How have the Rishonim Zion of Eretz Israel and Rivstok, how do they? Or Pashkut, I used to say.
Why are you asking specifically about those people? I'm telling you, all of the poskim at one. I don't know every specific posik whether he's machmir or mekel on this issue. But should I say a bracha? Should we get started on the party, the chaim? Does everybody, whoever wants? There's no more. Does everybody have who wants? Because I have a lot here. Does anybody want some? No. Chaim. We're continuing on the celebration of Purim, all the way to Pesach.
Yeah.
Getting ready for the 4 cups.
All the way to
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. Nice. Thank you. Nice wine. Okay. Kli shlishi, as we said, we assume that the power of the food, the heat of the food to affect the transfer of taste is no longer powerful enough. And then of course, 3rd vessel, 4th vessel, pouring from the second vessel, we're lenient as well. Pouring from the first vessel, we're machmir that the taste gets transferred to the outer layer. Irui causes transfer of taste kedei klifa, and kli sheni also. But pouring from a kli sheni, that has the din of a kli shlishi. And now the one variable which we haven't mentioned is how hot is the soup? How hot is the food? If the food is very, very, very hot, even if it's in a 2nd vessel or 3rd vessel or 4th vessel, it could happen, right? That it was like super bubbling when you poured it from the first pot, the kli rishon al gabei ha'esh, and then you don't let it sit in the tureen for very long. That right a second later, after it's been poured into the tureen, you see it's still bubbling. It's boiling hot. So according to what we said, it's a different din. Kli sheni, only kedei klifa. We have to assume that the outer layer gets the fleshik taste, the chickeny taste. But what if it's boiling, bubbling hot? It should have the exact same halacha as the kli rishon al gabei ha'esh. Some people are machmir on that, and they say there's actually 2 levels. We mentioned it the other day. Yad soledet bo, we said it's about 45 degrees, and there's a higher level, yad nichveit bo, which your hand is going to be burned by, not just recoiling from, but actually being burned by it. And that, some people are machmir, but the bottom line is that, and this brings us to the approach to all these definitions and that is that what we have in these definitions is a standard. We're trying to standardize the law for all cases and give a general rule, because if you don't have a general rule, it's going to be really messy. And what I want to explain is as follows. So you'll have one taste that gets some milk fell into a chicken soup, and you'll ask a non-Jew to taste it, and there'll be 40 times, not 60 times, only be 40 times the amount of the milk that's in there. Okay, you measure and the amount of milk versus the amount of the chicken soup, the fleshik pot. It's only 40 times, and you give it to a goy to taste, and this is, I don't taste any milk in here. Now we all know that the standard is 1 in 60th. You have to have 60 times the amount for us to be considered kosher. But that is a standardization based on how many times do you have to have in order to nullify a taste? Or you could have the opposite. You can have exactly the opposite as well. You could have 70 or 80 times, 100 times, and then the goy says, I still taste it. So what do you do? What do you do? So this is exactly the idea that I'm trying to say, that we follow the rules of Chazal. Chazal, that could be, why do you taste it? Because maybe there was some sharpness to the food that you can still taste, one kind or the other kind, or maybe it's a very bland type of food that was mixed in, and even though it's milchik versus fleshiks, and so these rules were given by Chazal to help us standardize the system. And they said 1/60th is always the measurement that we follow. What happens if you happen to actually have a goy right next to you, and he tastes it, and he says, I don't taste it if it's less than 40, we don't follow him. We go by the 1/60th. What happens if the opposite case? He says after it's 170, 1 in 100, and the goy still tastes it. Some people say you should be machmir, but the simple pshat, the simple understanding of the halacha is we go by 1/60th. It could be that this goy happens to be wrong or happens to have a very sensitive taste, which is halachically not considered taste, even though he tastes it. It's not considered to be halacha. We follow the rules of Chazal. They made it sure that they wanted to follow these rules. Maybe 1 in 40 is enough to nullify most tastes. But they said we're going to go by what we need 60 times to nullify all the tastes. There were maybe Chazal were a little machmir, but that's what we follow. We follow the 1 in 60.
60 and you can taste it?
So that's what I just said. That some people say you should be machmir, but the simple pshat is 160. Any other taste that's left over is not considered to be halachically significant taste, and we follow the rules of Chazal. They set up these rules for us, and including everything what I said at the beginning of the class about kli rishon versus kli sheni. Kli sheni, you peel off the outer peel; the rest of it has not absorbed. We don't have to assume that it absorbed, even if it was in the kli sheni right after. Right after it was poured into the kli sheni, and you can see it's still very hot. Halachically, it only can infuse taste in the outer layer, not in the entire thing. I'll take a question.
What if it's a Jew that has the taste set? So that drop gets in there. They work it out. It's 1/100th. So by Hazal, you're perfectly good to have it. You serve it at the table, and one of the people says, "Ooh, nice cream of chicken soup." For them, is it kosher?
Yes.
And not for the others in the room? I mean,
yes.
For the others
Yes.
in the room,
It's kosher for everybody, including for him. But there is opinion that says that the fellow should be machmir. But we follow the rules of Chazal, and everything that even if you taste it, you happen to have a very unique type of taste, but that's not halachically considered to be prohibited. Because one other stage that we didn't talk about, and this is called davar gush. Let's say you have a potato or a piece of meat. This whole idea of that kli sheni has less of a power to mevashel, to cause transfer of tastes. It's based on that. Well, okay, the sides of the pot are going to be cooling down the chicken soup, right? But it's not chicken soup. It's a potato. So it was in the first pot. It was very hot. If you were to pour some cheese on it, you'd say the cheese would be infused into the entire potato. But now you take the potato out of the first pot and you put it in another pot. Let's say it doesn't even have to be a pot, whatever it is. The sides of the potato are not touching the side of the pot. Some people say, some poskim say, that it's called a davar gush, something which is a one mass, one big mass. It could be a potato, it could be a steak, it could be anything that is an entire entity contained by itself. It retains its heat, even in a kli sheni, because it's not touching the sides of the kli sheni. And so that might have the power to cook up the cheese that you put on top of it, even if it's not in the original pot, even if it's in a secondary pot. And so the entire potato, according to this opinion, becomes milchik, for example, or the opposite, or the entire steak will still, if you pour milk onto a steak, if it's in a kli rishon, the entire steak becomes filled with milk taste. If you pour milk onto a steak, once you've taken it out of the first pot, well, if it's a davar gush and you pour milk on it, we still have to assume that the milk gets absorbed in the entire body, the entire mass of the object. It's only when you have liquids which are cooled off by touching the sides of the second vessel, that's when you can be lenient. And so we try to be machmir on a davar gush that if you really need it, you have a tremendous loss, there's room to be lenient. But in general, we paskin like that a davar gush, something which is one solid mass, it has the power to cook and to transfer taste, even after it's out of the kli rishon, and in a kli sheni, and even in a kli shli, even in a kli revi'i, because this whole step-down system doesn't work about objects which are independent of the vessel, essentially. An object that retains its own heat, that we're machmir for. Okay, questions to Yitzchak, we're waiting. Thank you.
If there's food like this, it's not like this, that is considered after this equal kishishi, it's like considered like Rishon. If there's things that are keeping the heat for longer time, not like
if it's on the fire,
not that when it was on the fire with them, but in the things like potatoes or food that is able to keep the heat, not like marak.
Davar gush. Davar gush, it's called. Gush is a mass.
That is considered like a clear Rishon.
Correct. Anything that davar gush, that's the chumrah, that even if you transfer it out of the first vessel, you have to treat it as if it retains its heat, and it can therefore cause transfer of taste. Like a kli rishon, yes.
You need to consider even if it's in kli rishon or revi,
Shlishi or revi, yes.
Like kli rishon.
Correct.
Treated like rishon.
That's correct. That's correct. That is the idea of davar gush. It's not accepted by everybody, but the common custom is to take that into consideration. Only when you're in great need can you ignore that idea. Okay, David, and then Hirsch.
I was going to say it makes sense, but I know that when you pull certain things from the oven, when you pull a turkey or a roast or something, the internal temperature continues to go up for 10, 20 minutes.
Interesting.
Because the outer layer is so hot. So when you're actually cooking, even though it may say cook until your internal temperature is 165 degrees, you might actually pull it from the oven at 160 degrees because the internal temperature will continue to rise even though you've pulled it.
Nice.
And then I'm wondering if there would be any halakhic implications to that. Essentially, any additional ones besides the one we were talking about, is essentially what you have is you have the outside of, let's say, that roast or that turkey acting as a clay for the inside of it. I don't know if there's any... the reason it's rising is the outside, the crust of it, as it were, is so hot
right.
that's
right.
continuing to bring heat in. So the meat on the inside, it's as though it's in a container of the meat.
We don't
outside.
separate it. We consider it all to be one mass of food. Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
We don't. Yes, here.
Does halachic transfer of taste occur only once Yad's level has been reached?
Yes.
So if it's like 43 degrees Celsius.
No halachic transfer of taste. Yes.
I can have warm water and pour.
Yeah. Yeah, you could have your meat and milk and warm water, and you wouldn't be violating any isur. I mean, there wouldn't be any cooking involved. Cooking gets defined by this cutoff.
And,
Anything below that, it does not affect cooking or transfer of taste.
and you recommend it to be a good idea to be soaked by Rob Newworth from Sugar Shabbat and say that the outside bowl is 45 Celsius and 113 Fahrenheit.
Yes.
What if the food is particularly like pungent? It does transfer taste, but like smell even of itself. Like for example, say you leave a piece of meat with a very pungent cheese. For whatever reason, it's inside like a cupboard because your child was particularly mischievous for whatever reason.
Yes.
Like, the cheese is like gets to be very smelling, and even though it's not hot, it's not yad salerebo. Do you still say
It's a
well,
fast-
you can cut off just the first layer, and then you go? Do you still say that?
Or maybe you don't even have to cut off the first layer. It's a very good question. What happens when you have pungent cheese that's cold next to meat, and if you leave it in a closed plastic bag, right? Or like you said, a cupboard right next to each other, we assume that some of that odor, some of those will sort of be transferred into the piece of meat. Halachically, we don't consider that. We're going to talk about that. In an oven, it's different. When you're cooking two items in the same oven, it's called reach, smell. So smell is considered to be significant inside an oven, and it's a machloket, but there's a discussion of that, but not when it's not in an oven. When there's no heat there whatsoever, we assume that each object retains its separate status, and whatever vapors, and also there's a question, what happens if there's vapor? I said if there's an oven, we assume there's heat, but then there's also this question of droplets. If you have a mist from the chicken soup can transfer taste, whereas if it's just smell, it's a different question. So these questions we're going to come to. Today's Tuesday, so it's going to be Sunday. We're going to talk about, it's called reicha and zeya. We use the Aramaic term for instead of reach, we say reicha, which is the way the Talmud called smell. And zeya is this mist, this type of droplets of zeya in modern Hebrew means? Modern Hebrew? You have zeya? No, the smell is reach. What's zeya? You should know. You should know this. No, not for cloud. Sweat. Sweat. Sweat is droplets which form, and so this is discussed in the Talmud, and we're going to cover it next week. Reach and zeya. But if it's all cold, I don't think that there's any problem of reach according to everybody.
According to halacha.
According to halacha. Yeah. And I think it's probably true even culinarily. It's a rare case that you'll have the taste of the cheese in the meat if everything's cold, even if they're in close proximity for a long time. I don't think it really penetrates. As pungent as it is to our noses, I don't think that the foods absorb the smell like we do. Any real taste gets transferred. But I don't.
You say cold, but it's only halachically cold. Like cold halachically could still be considered like a sunny day. If you brought home the shopping and it was still in the bag, and
right,
just waiting on the counter in the skylight for whatever reason.
Right. Well, it depends where you are in which part of the country, but assuming that you don't reach the temperature of 45 degrees, halachically it's still considered cold, and I don't think there's any problem with that halachically. Yeah.
Two forms of cooking I have a question about. One is ceviche, and the other one would be cold smoking.
So we spoke yesterday about this concept called kavush. If something's left in a pot, for example, or a food is left together with another food for 24 hours.
But ceviche is an hour or two, not 24 hours.
So if it's for 24 hours, then there's a problem that something, it's like preservatives, like pickling. Pickling transfers taste. And so the duration of time, going back to your question, if it's for 24 hours, then you might have the law of pickling, even if it's not touching, which is interesting. But I would have to look into that. But if it's actually touching, and then even if it's cold, there's a halacha called kavush, which means like pickled, and things get pickled. It doesn't even have to be harif. If it's for 24 hours, we assume that even cold, some taste gets transferred, and we assume that it's as if it was hot for 1 minute or cold for 24 hours are equal. Again, it's not in every case, but we'll talk about that.
So
Bezrat Hashem soon.
Transfers taste even if it's cold for these 24 hours.
No.
Transfers taste. What do you
I mean that if you have a cold, if you have a cucumber and you put it in milk for 24 hours, the cucumber will have to be treated as if it absorbed the taste of the milk, even though it's been cold that whole time. Okay? That's what I mean.
My question wasn't the pickling. I remember that from yesterday.
Okay,
So
so
ceviche
tell me about
takes-
ceviche, yeah.
It takes an hour to cook. It
Mhm.
involves putting lime juice in the fish. And over the course of that 1 to 2 hours, the lime juice breaks down the proteins. It's considered cooking it. It's chemically cooking it, even though it's not heat temperature cooking it.
yes.
So I was asking whether, how do we recognize that? Do we not count that? And the second case is cold smoking. So, for instance, Nova Scotia lox, which is not smoked over hot smoke like traditional smoking, it's smoked over cold smoke. So, for instance, if somebody was using, if some butter fell in, they used oil, vegetable oil, not vegetable oil, milk. If they used something dairy to get the fire going, is the milk now milchik from that? Because it might have a taste of it, or is it halachically not cooking and so we're okay because it never reached out, so let it go?
These are good questions. As far as I know, the two categories of the categories we've mentioned are the ones that are applicable. There's reicha, zeya, kavush, and everything else it's only with fire. So if you don't have fire there, and if it's not for 24 hours, and so then I don't think that there's halachically considered to be an infusion of taste. Someone else was waiting. Shua was waiting, and Chaim was waiting. So yeah, Shua.
So I haven't heard of this concept of cold transferring taste before.
Interesting.
So if I have a
I'm
freezer-
glad you came.
If I have a freezer, and I have a steak in the freezer, and I have buttermilk pancakes in the freezer.
Only if they're touching each other. They have to be
they
touching
have
each
to be
other.
touching.
Yes, they have to be touching
What
each
if-
other. Yes.
And if they're in plastic and they're touching each other, they're fine?
Yes. Yes.
And it has to be for 24 hours.
Yes, 24 hours. Yes. We're going to learn about it more in detail. I was just mentioning in passing that there is such a thing as transfer of taste, even cold, but not with reicha, not with just the smell. Another question here, Hirsch, yeah?
But you said that, so you made a comparison, 24 hours cold, an hour hot. You said that
A minute hot, even.
And 1 minute, 1 minute.
Well, even whatever, a second, yeah. If it's boiling hot, transfer. Again, this goes back to the discussion we were saying before. Just like I was saying, that the Chazal made a standard, 1/60th. Even though for some food it might be 1/40th, for some food it might be 1/70th. They said the standard is 1/60th. Same thing with the timing. We don't see in halacha that there's a difference of time other than the 24 hours thing with that. But whether it's 1 minute in the boiling hot soup, or if it's there for half a second or for 30 minutes. Halachically, if it's a kli rishon al gabi eish, there's transfer of taste, the whole thing. In other words, you have a milchik soup, okay? Milk. You're cooking up milk. And you have a steak, a piece of meat, and you dip it into the soup for 1 second. We assume that whole soup absorbed the taste of the steak, and the whole thing's not kosher if there's not 1/60th.
The whole steak absorbed the taste.
And the steak absorbed the milk, right? And then you take the same steak and you put it into another milky soup. Same thing's going to happen again. And then a third and a fourth. Wait a minute. We're assuming that the entire taste of the steak went into the soup, the first soup. How can then the entire taste of the steak go into the second soup, and into the third soup, and into the fourth soup? Halachically, the steak remains steak, And we're machmir that each and every pot of milk that doesn't have 60, to nullify it, is going to be absorbing the taste of this steak, and all of those pots will become treif, all those soups will become treif, and of course the steak is treif. And there's transfer of taste, assuming that each pot is a kli rishon al gabi eish. Even in one instant, we assume that all the taste, even though we know that it takes a while, biologically, physically, for the molecules to transfer from one medium to another, there's a certain time requirement. Halacha doesn't take that into consideration, and they give a general rule. If there's heat, and it's the first vessel versus, pouring versus second vessel versus third vessel, all within the categories that we've defined, the transfer of taste happens immediately, whether it was there for 1 second or for an hour. Okay, is that clear? If it's a kli rishon al gabi eish. Another question here? Somebody wanted to say, or we're good?
I think you've covered it.
We covered it. We made it clear that this. Yeah.
This is just, if the milky soup was cold, you would just rinse off the steak.
Exactly. If the milky soup is cold, rinse off the steak, and unless you see pieces of particles of the steak in there, the soup remains to be milchik and kosher, and you rinse it off. And if it's in a kli sheni, you would have to peel off the outer layer of the steak, but the rest of the steak would be kosher, right? Kli sheni, kadei klifa.
Even the soup.
The soup, if it doesn't have 60, if it has 60 times, then there's no problem. Even if the taste was absorbed, it's nullified. But if it doesn't have 60 times, you can't really peel off a part of the soup, right?
You can put it through a filter.
It doesn't help you though.
Regular.
If it's a kli sheni and we're going to be machmir for transfer of taste, kadei klifat, to the outer layer, I don't think you can peel off the outer layer of a soup. So the whole soup has to be considered to be milk and meat, and therefore not kosher.
So getting back to the ceviche then, since it's not halachically cooking, a nice smoky piece of meat could be with the ceviche, and I can remove it at the end and my ceviche is still parve?
I think so, but I don't really know what ceviche is, so I'm hesitant to give you a psak on this one. I'm just not familiar with the words, but let's look into it.
It's cooking with lime juice.
What do you put in the lime juice? Or what do you put the lime juice on?
You put spices, you put lime juice, you put your fish.
Fish.
Fish is the
So fish is in spices for an hour. Fish is
lime juice. The lime juice is chemically cooking it.
Okay.
It's,
and then meat falls on it? What's the problem? Does it become fleshik, you're asking me?
Yes.
I think not. Well, the fish can
the
have
acid of the lemon. No, sorry, lemon. What the hell is in lemon? The spice of the lemon and lime juice chemically denatures the proteins.
I understand, but that's not considered to be.
When heated.
It will not cause any transfer of taste, as far as I understand.
Even if you taste it halachically.
So
you could make a nice smoky ceviche using some meat, and then have that with a milchik meal, and you'd be okay because halachically
I think so, but I have to look it up. But I think so. According to what we said, that's the way it works. Okay, we'll stop here. Continue. Shat Hashem. Next week, the laws of Kashrut.
There's anyways like a whole lot